You learn well. I'll never live that down as long as I live.
It's very helpful, though. It really is. You know,
I was on the interchange, trying to get my knees.
I wouldn't do that today. I need to text her. They said it was checked out. You're like all that.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think we swing this thing twice now. Yes. Okay. Ms. Lou tells me that we do have a quorum, and so we'll get started on the September 6th meeting of the Transportation Coordinating Committee. First we'll call the meeting to order. We do have we provided a hybrid option for those who are not able to be here today. You can communicate in the chat. You may only hear the presenters clearly due to the acoustics, and the other members may not be audible. Staff will attempt to type questions from the room into the chat since it'll be hard to hear. Moving on, we will ask for approval of the August meeting minutes. Did everybody get a copy of those, and has everybody had a chance to review them? Is there a motion to approve? Bill, is there a second? I have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, we'll say the meetings, the minutes are approved. At this time, I'll open the floor to any member of the public who wishes to make a public comment to the Transportation Coordinating Committee. Comments can be emailed to comments@gnrc.org as well. Is there any member of the public in attendance here today who'd like to speak to the TCC? Hearing none. We'll move on to the action items on the agenda. First, I'll introduce Daniel Caparella, GNRC Transportation Planner. Daniel's going to present proposed amendments to the fiscal year 2023 through 26 Transportation Improvement Program for endorsement. And these amendments are scheduled to be adopted by the Transportation Policy Board on September the 20th. And so I'll turn it over to Daniel for that staff presentation.
All right. Thank you, Josh. So we have a fair amount of amendments for this cycle. This is cycle E. So following today's meeting, they will be out for public review and comment for a 10-day period before adoption on September 20th. So this is, again, cycle E, the last cycle for fiscal year 2023. So I'll go in order. There are 12 amendments adding about $13.5 million in federal funds to the TIP. So this first amendment, Southeast Transit Center, this is a recent grant award for Nashville MTA, both a bus and bus facilities federal grant as well as a State Improve Act transit grant. This is adding funds to the TIP, so about $5 million in federal funds and $5.5 million in state funds. This is a new project. You can go on to the next one, Shay. So the next project, adding the project to the TIP, this is Columbia's Nashville Highway at Bear Creek Pike intersection improvements. This is a project that was previously on the Columbia 3R local STBG grouping page, but received state STBG funds, federal funds for this project. So we're creating a new page for this project, adding that to the TIP. And then the next project is just reflecting those changes on the City of Columbia 3R Improvement Program grouping page. So zeroing that page out to show that the funds are actually captured on the individual project page that we're adding to the TIP. And then the rest of the amendments are going to be a result of backfilling the COVID relief funding that was obligated on both our regional data acquisition as well as the TDOT project back in May. Those of you may remember following the passage of the debt ceiling bill, the federal bill, we were in danger of losing all of our COVID relief funds and then being rescinded back to the federal government. So we had about 24 hours to obligate all of that funding on projects that were ready to obligate. And so there were 9 projects that lost that funding. And as a result, we've come up with an approach to replace the funding that was lost by using our active transportation program funding, which is suballocated STBG, as well as our transportation or transit and technology program for projects that are not eligible for ATP. So this first one, ADA and pedestrian signal improvements at various locations, City of Lebanon, just replacing that CRISA funding with USTPG funding. Straightforward. And just so everyone knows, STPG does require a local 20% match. And so there will be a few more projects that we're waiting on for the next cycle that need local match commitment. So we're pushing those to the November cycle. Next project is ADA compliance upgrades at various locations. Town of Smyrna, just again replacing those funds, those CRISA funds with USTPG. Next amendment is Memorial Boulevard traffic signal improvements, City of Murfreesboro project, replacing those Murfreesboro CRISA funds with Murfreesboro SPG. And then pedestrian improvements at various locations for Metro Nashville. Once again, placing those CRISA funds with USTPG funds. Next project is Raymond Hirsch Parkway, pedestrian safety improvements, City of White House, placing CRISA funds with USTPG. And then lastly, the streetlight LED conversion project, Hendersonville, replacing CRISA with USTPG. And then these last two amendments are just reflecting the funds that were removed from the active transportation program and the transit technology program. You'll see there's still a lot of money in both programs that we will hold a call for projects for both programs to actually program the rest of that funding. But just showing that the funding was removed to be placed as a replacement for CRISA funds on all of the CRISA projects. And then you'll see at the very bottom of that list are suballocated carbon reduction program awards for phase 1. I'll go through each of those awards in the next agenda item. And then following today's meeting, I'll add all of those awards to this TIP amendment cycle, which will be up for adoption on September 20th by the policy board. And I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has them. Yes, Jim.
Daniel, could you kind of go through the regional active transportation program funding allocations, as well as the regional technology and transit program, and explain that to us as far as how that's broken out, where the funding is, allocation, things of that nature?
So I'll start with the active transportation program. So this is a subset of our STBG suballocation. So we take 10% from both Murfreesboro and Nashville's STBG and set that aside for use on active transportation projects, so bike ped, safety related projects. And then you'll see that transportation alternatives program. So we take 100% through all 4 years of the TIP of our TAP funds, our suballocated TAP funds on and place them on this program.
Daniel, that's a bucket, right? So those are not tied to any particular individual project.
No, none of the funds on this grouping page are tied to any particular project.
What about the regional technology
Yeah, so
program?
that is just a subset of only STBG. We don't place TAP because TAP wouldn't be eligible for those projects. Same deal, both programs we will hold a call for projects and program all of those funds onto actual individual projects that will be awarded during that call for project cycle.
Do you typically do a call for projects?
Following the adoption of the TIP, obviously that has been a delayed process because of the STIP projection. Now the STIP has been approved, and so we'll be working through a timeline similar to how we did carbon
When the board
reduction.
approves next on the 20th, then this would be a call to project that would go out.
No. So we're still figuring that out when we're at the timeline of both these programs. So we'll be working through that internally, and then the board working through with the board to actually open a call for projects for these programs.
Follow up again.
Sure.
The regional technology, is that a percentage of our STBG funds, or is that A different pot of money.
Yes, it's a percentage of the STBG funds.
What percentage is that?
I believe it is 15%. And it's over all 4 years of STBG sub-allocation.
Effectively, really all it's doing is reducing the 2024 funding, Surface Transportation Block Grant, 10 million down to 7.
That's correct.
7. And so that's where you're getting it to fill in the Carissa.
Right.
Okay. And then we'll have still 38 million for
Right.
TIP for when y'all decide to have. Okay.
And both of these programs were decided on by the board in 2014 and 2018 to set aside the percentage of those sub-allocated funds for these programs.
All those Carissa are bike ped type pedestrian.
Except for Murfreesboro's project, which is why we took the TTP money, because it wasn't eligible for AT.
So for instance, would Lebanon's tip amendment get money from this, one of these two pots? Because they're mostly pedestrian signalization.
Any pedestrian bicycle improvements are eligible for active transportation program.
On the second, the second one, the Columbia project, main intersection there, 31 and 412. Is there any reason why it just couldn't go ahead and fund the whole thing? Or is there some reason?
So that's the total project cost reflects funding that's already been obligated.
Okay. Gotcha.
And then the programming is just what hasn't been
Okay.
obligated yet.
I thought there was just a few $100,000 short.
Yep.
Pretty expensive. All right.
All these projects, where the Carissa money was removed, are they all ready to go?
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember exactly what the status is of every single one of them, but yeah, they're all waiting to move forward since they didn't have funds to actually complete the phases that hadn't been obligated yet.
Questions for staff?
And one more, and I think it's a typo, I don't know, or maybe it's just because I'm not familiar on the Smyrna ADA compliance. Is that Rocky Fork Road or Rocky Springs Road in description? I was trying to, the reason I'm asking is because I like to figure out what the distance is or what the project is and try to make comparisons when we're trying to prepare our own little projects like that, similar to that. So wasn't sure about where Rock Springs.
Rock Springs Road is parallel San River Parkway. It's a local street.
Okay, I knew Rocky Fork is.
Right.
All right, no big deal.
Okay, hearing none, call for a motion to endorse Cycle E amendments to the 2023 through 26 TIP.
So moved.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please vote by saying aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. All right, we'll move on to the next item, informational item A, suballocated carbon reduction program fund recommendations. And I'll turn this over to Daniel again for a staff presentation.
We have two new staff that I'll introduce later in the meeting, so I won't always be the only agenda. All right, so on August 16th, the Transportation Policy Board opened the call for projects for the carbon reduction program funds. This was as a result of a lot of projects in our region having cost overruns in their later phases, so right away in construction. And so just as a reminder, this is how much funding is available on the different levels. So 6.4 billion available nationwide, 139 million for Tennessee, and then our broken out suballocated funding for this program. Very similar to CMAQ, just as a reminder, those are the list of eligible projects. And then in terms of requirements, 20% non-federal match, ITS and safety projects are eligible for 100%, same as CMAQ. So this was the timeline that the board decided on. We're doing 2 phases. So this first phase is really for very urgent needs, cost overruns as a result of, moving forward to construction bids is really what most of them ended up being. And then in terms of the criteria that we used to prioritize, it had to be an existing TIP project for this phase 1 that received either CMAQ, TAP, or multimodal access grant funds, and then had cost overruns related to those sources. So application was due last Friday, and then staff did an evaluation of all of the submissions. And then in a slide, I'll present the recommendations. And then in terms of phase 2, the board will open that call for projects on September 20th. There'll be another SurveyMonkey link for you all to apply. I know we had a few late submissions. Just submit those projects for phase 2. We'll include them in our evaluation. But again, it says new projects. These aren't necessarily new construction projects, but projects with preliminary phases, not necessarily in right-of-way construction, that are still in need of additional funding. And then we're rolling over one of the submissions from the first round into the second round, which I'll go through in a sec. So in terms of availability, this first phase was pulling from the fiscal year 2022 and 2023, so the carryover from 2022, which we never programmed, and fiscal year 2023. It's a little over 6 million total, about 730,000 from Murfreesboro, and a little over 5 million from the National Davidson UCA. And then phase 2 will be awarding funds from those subsequent fiscal years. These are the applications we received. It's about 20 million in total. And as you'll see, that first Murfreesboro project, they were the only applicant from the Murfreesboro UCA. So Rutherford Boulevard Adaptive Signal Control Technology. We also have an alternative funding gap that we were able to cover with a mix of programming the construction reserve funds that were already on the project, in addition to the carbon reduction funds. And then TDOT was able to find additional CMAQ funding to cover some of the funding that we weren't able to for that project.
Daniel?
Yes.
And you may just explain this. I was digesting the thing, so if you didn't, forgive me. So about 3/4 of that is tied up in the RTA project for bus service operations. And the asterisk says application didn't meet phase 1 guidelines, so it's been rolled into phase 2.
Right.
What?
So it wasn't the same kind of cost overrun, and we also didn't have enough to cover their full ask. And there's a lot more funding available in phase 2. And so we felt that, only having 700,000, it wouldn't even cover one of their lines for RTA. And so
What is it, Felix? What is that project?
It's operations for all the regional routes,
Regional bus routes.
regional bus routes. So, everything serving all the surrounding counties.
Okay.
And they've typically received CMAQ funding to help supplement those routes, but because TDOT is no longer holding call for projects until 2025 at least, they're not able to get additional funding to continue those operations.
Okay.
So these are the 4 projects. Again, 2 Smyrna projects that I think all 3 of these projects, other than RTA, have gone to bid for construction, which is why we knew there's a cost overrun on that phase.
So the other 3 projects are pretty well about to struggle.
Yeah, so they'll be able to obligate almost immediately. So that was an important consideration in our. So these are the proposed awards for phase 1. So those 3 other applications, the Murfreesboro projects and the 2 Smyrna projects, we're able to fully fund all 3 of those, and then rolling over the additional, it's about 700,000 or so into the next round to program that along with the subsequent fiscal years. And again, for Murfreesboro, it'll be the Murfreesboro UCA's carbon reduction funds. So it'll be the full amount of those. And then almost all of the Nashville suballocated carbon reduction funds.
If you go back to the prior slide.
Mhm.
So the RTA is asking for 15 million.
Right.
And how much is actually available to fund in the next round?
For phase 2 is a little over 8 million.
So if we give it to RTA, they're eating it all up.
Well, I mean, that we'll see who submits other projects for phase 2. So it'll be the same sort of prioritization process. In terms of, you know, we'll go through those applications when we receive them, but I know there's at least 3 because of late submittals in RTA's project. And then in terms of next steps, include these phase 1 award recommendations to this current TIP amendment cycle. We'll have to post them, you know, later today so that they are up for public review and comment for the 10-day period. And then open the application for phase 2 on September 20th. Application deadline November 30th, and then we'll award these recommendations in the January cycle for amendments.
Let me go back, ask a question for clarification. These 3 projects, all Rutherford County projects, they are allowed to dip into not only the $1.9 million set aside for Murfreesboro urbanized area, but also the 13.8.
So
Okay.
Smyrna and Laverne used to be part of the Murfreesboro UZA, but are now part of the Nashville UZA.
Okay.
So that's why those, you see those differentiations.
7
between-
is eligible for.
That's correct.
1.9, and so there's a balance then
Right.
of a little over $1 million that. Okay, gotcha.
The overall amount that was available.
Phase 1 is like 5.7 million. Or no, sorry, 7 is about 700,000, so maybe a little over 6 million.
Those funds still be available for phase 2.
That's
They're
correct.
rolling. Okay.
The other part of the question I have, the phase two funding for new projects are only projects that are in the current TIP. It's not projects that we've applied for that aren't in the TIP yet.
That's correct.
I thought phase 2 was going to be eligible for new projects.
Well, it's not new construction projects. It's projects that are in the current TIP, but maybe not in right of way and construction. But if you do have a new project, you should still submit it because we can work with you the same way we do for any new project to find available funding sources.
Got it.
We want to know what your needs are.
Thank you.
I'd imagine a project that's going to construction soon is going to get a priority, right?
That's correct.
Over a new start, essentially, right?
Right.
Any other questions for Daniel? And I believe this is a non-voting item.
Correct.
And so we'll move on to the next informational item, which is, off the page. Project Delivery Task Force recommendations.
Question?
Sure.
Why would this be a non-voting item if this is to go before the TP? See, I mean, why
Well-
would this board not take a position to recommend if this is going to go to the board for a vote?
Well, so the board is the voting body that will actually
I know,
approve.
but this board should make a recommendation to go to the main board. That way they know that we're all in consensus with this item moving forward.
Essentially a recommendation.
Yeah, so I'm not saying, but we should, I mean, everything that we vote on should be a recommendation that goes to the TPC so that they know that we're in favor of this item moving forward. So I'm just wondering why we would not want to make that recommendation, that we're in support of what staff is recommending.
If you'd like to go ahead and.
Yeah,
An action item.
I've
You're welcome to do
I've made my same sentiments plain in the past that I think it's something we should do. During my director's report, y'all might have mentioned the last meeting, we talked about bylaws and that kind of thing. So I'm gonna touch on that again toward the end of the meeting, but Daniel, unless there's some reason why we can't do it.
No,
is there a reason?
you're the chair and you're the
Sure.
the
Well,
committee, so if you want to
if-
make it an action item. you're
if I have a motion to endorse the list that was promulgated there and to recommend that we send it on to the Transportation Policy Board, is there a motion? Second. I don't know who the second was there. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? Hearing none, I appreciate that. That was a good idea. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
Opposed, but like to hear what you're going to send to first.
I believe it was the list that was recommended. Yeah,
Talking about project delivery task force.
no, we're not on that yet. No. We were backing up. We were headed,
sorry.
we were headed to the project delivery task force, but we backed up a little bit.
Okay.
So it's those three projects there is what we're recommending to go to the transportation policy board.
All right,
Now, turn it over to Daniel for,
this is the last one. All right, so I'm just going to give an overview of everything the project delivery task force has accomplished in the last year and a half. I'll keep it as brief as I can. I know we have some people in the room that are actually on the project delivery task force, so if you have anything to add at the end, feel free. So really the purpose of the project delivery task force was to make sure that we understand the issues that contribute to project delays and have resulted in our region having a large amount of unobligated funds in terms of our suballocated funding. That was sort of the impetus to creating the project delivery task force to, help understand the process and speed up the actual implementation of projects and obligation of funds, and also to better track the progress of projects that are in our TIP, regardless of the implementation agency. So participants were member jurisdictions such as yourself, implementing agencies, TDOT, and FHWA, and relevant TDOT divisions. So TDOT local programs, programming divisions that are responsible for project delivery. And then the task force responsibility was to identify projects that have fallen behind schedule, research the causes, really understand those delays, and identify actions that can actually remedy the issues and, fix the issue of our projects being delayed and taking 10 plus years. This was the original task force roster. So made up of local officials, agency staff, and TDOT. As you'll see, the ones that are highlighted in yellow are folks that have moved on from their current positions. So Derek Adams is no longer the mayor of Nolensville. As you know, Andy Barlow, he actually attended our last meeting as a representative TDOT, but he's over at TDOT now, not with the city of Mount Juliet. And then Faye DeMassimo is now not with the National Department of Transportation. And so Diana has taken her place on the task force. In terms of meetings, so September of 2021, I guess it's been 2 years now. But we started that first task force meeting sort of with a problem statement. So talking about the goals and objectives and why the task force was meeting, as well as an MPL 101 so that everyone's on the same page of understanding the process of the TIP, what projects have to go through as they are developed and implemented, and just a general MPL 101 for all members, which is similar to the MPO 1 that you all get every year in our annual member orientation. So then in October, we went to Portland. So I guess our goal through these meetings was to meet at different agencies and local governments. We did a funding 101, so understanding all of the funding sources that are available, as well as when projects need to be amended in the TIP, federal funds, state funds, local funds, as well as a TIP review, understanding the purpose of the TIP, and a preview member survey. So it's essentially a survey that we sent to you all later in the process to gather input on what delays you experience as project proponents and maybe ideas that you might have on how to improve the process. And then we went to Franklin in December and talked about annual obligations, going over the amount that was obligated both on a suballocated level as well as in the state level in our region. And then we went to Murfreesboro and previewed our TIP tracker app. Most of you probably remember the use of the TIP tracker. It was a application called NAC that we use for the development of the current TIPs, the fiscal years 2023 to 2026 TIP, to better track the status of projects and understand the needs going forward so that we could better address them in the new TIP. And then we talked more about obligations and potential strategies. Then we went to Nolensville and previewed the report to TPB, which was presented last year. Talked about roles and responsibilities in terms of actually implementing some suggestions on how to improve the process, and then a preview of the new tip. And the last two meetings were essentially going over the draft recommendations that the task force came up with. All of these recommendations were taken from both the survey from local members as well as through discussion that we had in each of these task force meetings. So the way we categorized that was with priority actions and additional considerations, which I'll go through in a second. And then we haven't scheduled our 8th meeting, but it's essentially a meeting that's going to be figuring out how to actually implement the priority actions and additional considerations. And then we also had 3 TDOT coordination meetings. These were essentially to meet with TDOT leadership and different divisions at TDOT so that they understand and are on board with all of the recommendations and issues that the task force was bringing up. They are the implementing agency, and they're responsible for the project development process. And so any changes that are made to that process have to be approved by TDOT. And so we met with them 3 times, 2 at TDOT headquarters, and then the last meeting was with the whole project delivery task force, where we heard about TDOT's new project delivery network, which is just an improvement to their state-led delivery program that we heard about. And then we talked about the implications of potentially applying those same improvements to locally managed projects so that everyone in here can benefit from any improvements to the process. In terms of some of the common obstacles, I think all of these are most, if not all, are obstacles that you experience in delivering your projects. So we categorize those into major, moderate, and minor obstacles. Major being lengthy project review and approvals. So, it might be stuck in environmental, it might be stuck in right of way, and might take a while based on the way that the project is actually being reviewed to get back to you so that you can move forward with the next phase. Utilities and utility relocation. I think this is one of the most common challenges that we encountered with project components is having a lengthy utility and utility relocation process that delays the project. In terms of moderate obstacles, staff capacity and training, we've all had a lot of staff turnover, both local, regional, and on the state level. And doing the training that it takes to actually educate people on the project development process so they can go through it smoothly is difficult and something we've also struggled with. And then obviously this has been the theme recently, lack of funding or cost overruns, delaying a project because you don't have sufficient funding to continue with the next phase. And then in terms of minor obstacles, conflicting design expectations. So local agencies might have different ideas of how they want to design their project than TDOT's design guidelines. And then finally, lack of neighborhood and community buy-in. You might not have local support on a project, and that might delay your implementation of the project. So then through those obstacles and lots of discussion with the task force, we came up with areas of opportunity. So this first one, info exchange, essentially a communication-based area of opportunity. I think a lot of the issues that we talked about were communication-based. We don't have, a project, one database for all project information that everyone can go to. There's, multiple databases. So providing stakeholders access to latest project details on scope, schedule, costs, any project details in general. We've traditionally had a hard time finding out the status of a project, and it's a lengthy process that can further delay the project. And then education and training, so ensuring that all project proponents and stakeholders in the project delivery process have access to local programs training, manuals, guidelines, and facilitating that communication among locals and TDOT divisions so that they're communicating throughout the project development process, any delays that they might experience. And then funding priorities, this is really what we do with the TIP, is making sure that if you anticipate any cost overruns or additional funding needs for a project, getting to those early and understanding the full cost of the project so that anytime you might get stuck because of insufficient funding, we don't delay the project further. And then workflow and process, creating more efficiencies for implementation of large projects, through innovative methods like design build. And then, streamline delivery process for smaller, less complex projects like ITS or BikePed. So In terms of draft recommendations, we split these up into priority actions and additional considerations. So priority actions are steps that GNRC has either already taken or is in a position to take this year. So these are actions that we can take as an agency. And then additional considerations are recommendations for all the rest of the project delivery partners. So whether it's TDOT or local agencies or all three of us, or Federal Highway, recommending guidance for, those additional considerations that can improve the process and speed up delivery. All right, so I'll go through these quickly, but the first one we've already done. I'll introduce Taylor in a second once we get to our staff report, but we have hired a project delivery coordinator for our MPO program. It's essentially a position to be a liaison between, the project proponent, the local, and TDOT divisions throughout the project development process. So local programs, programming, and environmental right of way. This position, has a really good understanding of the project development process. It can help guide locals and anticipate delays and really, be your liaison throughout the project development process so that, we can tackle any issues that a project might have. 2 is developing a framework for the project planning fund. You might remember in our current tip, we set aside $5 million of our SDBG for preliminary planning. So, if projects have been delayed for multiple years and might not have gone through any preliminary planning, setting aside a planning fund to actually do planning studies and do additional planning for projects that, might have gotten stuck or might not be able to get through NEPA. And then, so the second action is essentially saying that we need to develop a framework for how we actually apply those funds to projects. And then number 3 is reviewing and updating the TIP programming policies. We have a set of TIP programming policies that allow the board to take action on certain projects. So, we have a policy that allows project funding to be moved from a project that isn't moving forward to a project that needs additional funding. So going through and reviewing and updating those programming policies so that they might be more effective. Number 4 is establishing a standing programming review committee. So I mentioned earlier in this process that we might have projects that have been sitting there since 2008, 2004, projects that have been in the TIP for a really long time. Reviewing existing projects and saying, all right, well, we might need to take action on this project and either remove it from the TIP or move funding to a different project. And then number 5 is assessing the potential for project bundling. This is an FHWA best practice, essentially using one contract on, multiple projects that are of the same delivery method. It's an innovative approach that can, speed up the project delivery process for projects that are, similar in nature. And then in terms of additional considerations, I won't go through all of these right now. I'll go through a few of them, but these are steps that local governments, us, TDOT, can take to ensure that, you understand the needs of your community before you begin a project. So local capital improvement planning, I'm sure those of you who go through a capital improvement plan process understand the importance of going through and identifying potential funding strategies for projects and assessing the needs across all the infrastructure types for your community. Early coordination meetings, number 4, having early coordination meetings with TDOT and with your consultant to understand any potential delays that might occur during the project development process. Streamlining process for non-capacity projects. So, bike ped projects, ITS projects that aren't increasing the capacity of the transportation network, but are getting stuck in the process the same way maybe your road widening is. So these are all really just additional considerations that we're going to continue working on throughout all levels of government to ensure that we're making the process more efficient. And then in terms of next steps, we'll be giving a presentation to the policy board on September 20th, which is going to be really similar to this presentation that I just gave. And then figuring out a final meeting of the task force, and then identifying, best practices and peer examples and developing actual implementation to accomplish all these steps. So that was a lot of information. If anyone has any questions, happy to take that.
You go back to the slide with the key recommendations, yeah, the
Priority
priority actions, yeah. I think number 2 probably got the most discussion at the project delivery task force at that meeting. That's, I think that's kind of exciting for this group. It's very, the way I understood it is that one of the goals of that potentially there, the project planning fund, is to kind of promulgate the planning studies. Like, I think that a corollary is like what Steve Allen's group has done historically at TDOT. I forget what they call those things. Do y'all know what the
Transportation planning reports.
the TPRs? Yeah, the TPRs. Yeah. And so I think that one got a lot of questions about how that was going to work. And if we're going to set up planning funds for individual projects, who's going to decide who's going to get that money and how's that going to work? And so I think that there will have to be a lot of technical review on a lot of those things. And the TCC probably has a role there to figure out, how that money gets allocated. And I think it's sorely needed too. I think there's a lot of projects that have gotten into the TIP over the years that, the goal, I'm not saying that's happened a lot, but the goal is just get your project into the TIP, whether you looked at it really or not. You don't know what's going to go into it or anything. And so they get stuck for 20 or 30 years sometimes. And so I think that's a really good idea. I'm excited about number 2, particularly to make sure that projects are really vetted on the front end. I think that's a really good step.
And to Josh's point, we'll be working with you and the policy board to figure out exactly how you like that.
The TPR, or whatever we choose to call it when we open this fund, it will be required to be inclusive of some sort of preliminary cost estimate.
I would imagine that it would. I would hope.
That's sort of the
It's one of the
goal.
major recommendations that came out of the task force. Did you bring what the actual language is that will be going to the board? Because there was also a lot of discussion about the way the language was actually being presented to the board. Did you prepare that, or you just did this brief summary?
I did this brief summary, but if you would like a copy of all the slides that we presented to the task force, I'm happy to.
I just thought it would be good for
I
this.
can send that out
I think it would be good for the TCC to understand what the language actually was, because there was a lot of conversation over the language that moved forward. That will be moving as a recommendation from the task force to the board.
Sure, I'm happy to send that out.
In relation to priority action 2, is there going to be like a pre-qualifier that the local government have a adopted transportation element, or?
We'll have to figure that out. That'll be part of developing the framework.
I think that's part of the implementation. We felt like there needed to be more conversation to understand what would be necessary to move it forward. But the important thing was, if something was to go in the TIP, it was well thought out. It is something that could actually be built, and that funding was actually available both at whatever level, local level and state, federal, and everything. So that, again, as Josh had mentioned, where you don't have items sitting in the TIP for an extended amount of time. And then there was a lot of conversation and understanding that some cities have the ability to do a lot of that preliminary work, and some cities did not. So we wanted to make the conversation was how the MPO would be able to assist with getting that work done, so it could get done and then allocated and planned and put into the TIP. So there was a lot of discussion around that as well, to support those cities that maybe didn't have all the personnel that was available to get the work done that needed to happen. They would actually, and that's why we have a delivery coordinator.
And that was really as a result of needs that we found throughout the TIP development process of, project proponents saying, we haven't done preliminary planning. We would like to, but we don't have the funds for it, or we don't have the resources for it. So meeting that need for, all of the members in our region.
Thank you, Daniel. Are there any additional questions for Daniel? Okay, this is just a non-voting item unless somebody wants to vote on something here, but I don't think there's much to vote on. But I appreciate staff.
Will the committee be ongoing, or is this pretty much the end of its?
I think it's kind of wrapping up. I think there's one more meeting scheduled, and we don't have a date for that yet. But I think it's kind of like the way when we left the last one, it seemed like it was kind of a conclusion kind of a meeting, where and then periodically there maybe is some discussion about in the future continuing to have some kind of a project committee to continue.
Number 4.
Right. Yeah.
So the idea is to move into a more implementation committee that will be established by the board that will actually carry out the programming changes that might need to be made as we go throughout the TIP.
All right, that's that one. And at this time, we'll move on to the regular reports. Unless anybody had anything else. Did anybody have anything else on that? Okay. Moving to the regular reports, we have the FHWA FTA report. Turn it over to Melanie Murphy for that report.
Having me. Like every time I talk to y'all, I talk about money, and I'm here to talk again about money that's available. So last month, the SMART grant program, the NOFA, was released. So I just want to make everyone aware that makes $100 million available. 100,000 would be a whole different story. $100 million available through the USDOT. That program is really focused on helping deploy technology to, make traffic make the system more efficient and safe. And it's really targeted towards, local governments, public agencies, that pot of funds. The deadline for that is October 10th, 2023. There's 2 grants available, really similar to the Safe Streets for All. There's grant 1, phase 1, that's planning and prototype grants. And those are capped at $2 million. And then stage 2 is an implementation grant, which is up to $15 million. But the idea is to get an implementation grant, you'd first get a planning prototype grant. So it's really trying to put emphasis on the planning piece of it before you actually go for implementation grant. And that one is open for units of local government and an MPO as well. So I just wanted to mention that. There are some webinars I thought might be of interest. I just kind of saw them before I came here, so I'm going to shoot them over to Daniel. Just some that are hosted by USDOT, but one of them was utilizing USDOT data and mapping tools for stronger grant applications. Because I know I was talking about grant applications, so providing y'all some places to maybe get some assistance would be good. And then one too about using NEPA review to define and shape better projects. I know there's a lot of talk about NEPA and kind of the process and the project delivery process. So just wanted to point those out. And that was it all. That's all I had.
Would you mind sending me the list of those grants so I can include them in the?
Yeah. I'll shoot everything over.
Will you send that out to everybody, or does that go on on your website? We have to go in and get it.
Both. So
Okay.
I'll send it as a follow-up in the email,
Perfect.
and it'll be posted on the packet as well as our grant page.
Thank you, sir.
Move on now to the TDOT report. It says Stacy Morrison was supposed to be here, but I don't see Stacy. I do see somebody over there with a.
I am pseudo Stacy. I'm Herman Wright. Thank you for having me. I'm with OCT. And as far as our report today, we just wanted to give some status on the statewide participation program. We had 102 applications submitted. Those were pared down to 66 that are actually being reviewed. And of those 66, 30 are relevant to Region 3, our region. The process is that the first of the year, we're going to present those findings to the legislature and let them vote on it. But that's pretty much where we are right now.
What was your name? I'm sorry.
I'm Herman Wright.
Herman Wright. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Let's get this man a name tag.
We'll make sure that happens next time.
All right. I think I'm next on the agenda. As we talked about a little while ago, at the last meeting, back in August, we talked a little bit about bylaws and need for bylaws. That's something that continues to come up. I'm talking to staff about it a little bit. And somebody mentioned at the last meeting, appointing a committee, a subcommittee to work on that. We don't have bylaws, so technically I don't have the authority to appoint any committees, but I'm going to imply some authority, I guess, to myself. I'm gonna talk with Michael a little bit about it this morning. And so I would like to set up a subcommittee, a bylaws creation subcommittee. We'll come up with something snazzier to call it, I guess. But I'm going to violate one of my capital rules and blindside some people. I haven't talked to any of you people about it at all. And so if you don't want to participate or can't or anything, just let me know either now or after the meeting. But as we sat and talked, I thought about who would be a good, all of you guys would be great to serve on this committee. I think we all are planners and deal with this kind of stuff all the time. But Diana, I think you have expressed an interest in serving. I'd like to, if you'd like to participate, I'd like to appoint you. Out in Wilson County, Tom, would you be willing to serve? He's very enthusiastic. Jonathan Marston is the vice chairman. I'd like for you to serve as well. Would you be willing to serve? And Jim in Murfreesboro, would you be willing? Okay, and then I'd like to serve on it as well, so I'll appoint myself to the committee. And that's 5 members. Anything bigger than that may get a little unwieldy. If somebody really wants to participate, though, let me know, and we'll definitely. I wouldn't have a problem with putting more people on, but I'd like to make that appointment if it's all right with the staff and everything. And so we'll move on to that here in the future, and we'll be working with staff. Of course, staff will, as they always do, I'm sure will do the lion's share of the work, and we'll pretend like we actually did something, that kind of thing. But actually, I do think it is an opportunity for all of us to get our input into how this board should work. I think what I care about the most is the thing that keeps coming up is just that, let's not meet if we're not going to actually be technical about stuff and look at the items that are coming before us and make recommendations and that kind of thing. And so I think that's something I would like to address. That's one of my goals for the committee. So that's all I've got to say about that. The only other thing I wanted to mention, it looks like he's got some reinforcements that have arrived here that are going to help him. But I want to say kudos to Daniel for stepping into the breach. And I personally had employees, younger employees. As I get older and grayer, I talk about younger employees more. I've noticed, but I've had the younger employees that would have shirked or shied away from that kind of responsibility and having to deal with the fire of all the different communities and needs and that kind of thing. And I think Daniel stood up and did it. And I commend him for that. And I think he's done a really good job. And so I think I'd like to give him a little round of applause. Appreciate what you've done, Daniel. And that's all I have. So that's my staff report. We'll turn it over to the staff for any additional items.
All right, so we've brought in reinforcements. I'll introduce both of them. So Taylor Lee, you may know him from TDOT local programs. You might have worked with him before. So he's coming on as our project delivery coordinator, which I went through earlier, essentially a liaison between you and the TDOT divisions that you have to go through. But I'll hand it over to Taylor if he wants to say anything.
Hi, everybody. So Taylor Lee, I've been local programs, was with local programs for about 5.5 years. I've worked with a lot of y'all in the past. So I'm excited to work again with you in the future. Anyone I haven't worked with, I'm looking forward to get to know you. I'm just really, I think it's a really good opportunity to help get everyone's projects delivered quicker. I think that saves money. I think that saves frustration. So anything I can do to help at all, contact me with anything. I'll be happy to help and happy to assist. And as we get more of these implementation, I think next meeting, we'll definitely have some more concrete steps, but I'm really excited to be working with everybody.
And Shay Northfield, she actually has been in our on GNRC's team in the aging department for three years now. And now we brought her onto the planning team as the TIP coordinator. So we'll be working to get her up to speed, and she'll be interfacing with all of you on your various projects.
Hey everyone, nice to meet y'all. I was like waiting, I don't know. Nice to meet y'all. Looking forward to working with you.
All right, and then finally, at the back of our packet, it's actually the same status report as you saw last time. We'll get the monthly obligation report from local programs probably next week, and we'll include, that those August numbers for you. But again, this is our TIP status report that shows you, application levels throughout the course of fiscal year 2023. So take a look at that and let us know if you have any questions. I'm not going to go through the whole thing again, but yeah, that's all I've got.
Questions, staff, on anything? Okay. Any other business to come before the board today?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't go through the upcoming meetings. So on the 20th, we'll have our Transportation Policy Board meeting. So again, those Carbon Reduction Fund Phase 1 award recommendations, adopting the TIP amendments, as well as, basically the same things you heard today. And then also following at the annual partnership luncheon on the 20th, we'll have former governors Bredesen and Haslam there to speak as guests, and then an annual award ceremony and a release of GNRC's annual report. And then on October 18th, our regional council body will be meeting. You'll hear an update on solid waste planning, cybersecurity awareness, and available grant opportunities. And again, those meetings are all on our website at gnrc.org/calendar. All right, yeah, Josh.
Any other business? Hearing none, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, start back here. Yeah. 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.